They said her bread was treason, that a woman with a soft heart was more dangerous than a man with a loaded gun, and in the winter of 1871, when the prairie wind cut like a knife and the Comanche camps along the Brazos were starving, Sarah Whitlock chose compassion over fear. Every night, after the lamps in town were dimmed and the sentry on the north gate was half asleep, she would walk the snow-covered trail beyond the palisade with a basket of warm cornbread, strips of salted venison, and jars of beans sealed with beeswax. She never asked for anything in return, not blankets, not beads, not protection, only that the children she fed would live to see spring. But in a world where suspicion grew faster than wheat, it only took one loose tongue, one set of eyes peering from behind a frosted window, to turn kindness into a hanging offense. At dawn on a Monday so cold even the dogs stayed in their kennels, the sheriff and 3 deputies stormed her cabin, ripped her from her bed, and dragged her barefoot down Main Street with her nightgown trailing in the mud. "Traitor!" a man spat. "She's been giving aid to the enemy." Another shouted. "She said nothing, not when they shoved her to her knees, not when they nailed a placard to her chest that read 'Fed Savages,' not even when they tied her hands behind her back and built the gallows in the center of town." The preacher's voice trembled as he read from the good book, but his eyes never met hers. The mayor gave the signal. The trapdoor clapped open, the rope snapped taut, and Sarah's body swung slowly in the wind while the townsfolk stood in silence, some with satisfaction, others with shame, all too afraid to speak. They buried her at the edge of town, in a shallow grave without a marker, and most thought that would be the end of it. But 3 days later, as the pale sun hung low over the frozen prairie, the first sound came, a faint tremor underfoot, the kind that makes dishes rattle on shelves, and then the sound grew, deepened, until the air itself seemed to hum with it. From the western ridge, black shapes began to crest the horizon, and dust plumes rose like storm clouds. It was the Comanche. 300 riders, each painted for war, their faces striped in red and black, feathers streaming from their hair, rifles slung and lances gleaming. At their head rode a tall, broad-shouldered man known to the settlers as Gray Hawk, a war chief with a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. He had known Sarah. Years earlier, after a skirmish left him bleeding near the river, she had found him, stitched his wound, and sent him away with bread in his pack. He had told her then, in halting English, "One day, I repay." Now that day had come. The town saw them and panicked. The mayor barked orders for the gates to be barred. The sheriff gathered every able-bodied man and shoved rifles into their hands. Women and children were herded into the church. From the bell tower, a boy shouted that the riders were splitting into 2 wings, surrounding the town like wolves circling a wounded buffalo. Then the hooves hit the earth in unison, a sound like rolling thunder, and the Comanche charged. The first wave loosed arrows that struck with deadly precision, shattering windows, pinning shutters closed, knocking rifles from men's hands. The second wave swung ropes and yanked defenders from their posts. Smoke began to rise from the barn, set alight by a flaming spear. Gray Hawk rode straight through the gunfire, his horse kicking up clods of frozen dirt, and he never once slowed. He and his men cut through the barricade, scattering townsfolk like dry leaves in the wind. The sheriff stood his ground until Gray Hawk's lance punched through the wood of his rifle stock and knocked him to the ground. Gray Hawk, dismounted, ripped the rope from his saddlebag, the very rope they had used to hang Sarah, stolen from her grave, and held it high for all to see. "You kill one who gave bread," he shouted in his own tongue. "Now you learn what it means to be hungry for mercy." They dragged the mayor from his office, the blacksmith from his forge, and the soldier who had kicked the trapdoor. One by one, they looped the rope around their necks and hanged them from the same beam that had taken Sarah's life. The rest of the townsfolk were spared, but stripped of their weapons and made to kneel in the snow as Greyhawk addressed them. "Remember her," he said, tapping the cornbread basket now hanging from his saddle horn. "Or we come again." By sundown, the riders were gone, vanishing back into the plains like a tide pulling out to sea, leaving the town half-burned, its leaders swaying in the wind, and the memory of hooves thundering in their ears. They rebuilt in time, but no one ever dared to speak ill of Sarah Whitlock again. Travelers passing through would sometimes hear the story and glance uneasily toward the western ridge, as if expecting to see a dust cloud and the black shapes of riders cresting the horizon. And on cold nights, when the wind blew in from the prairie, some swore they could hear the faint sound of a woman's voice singing an old Comanche lullaby. And if you believe that one person's kindness can shake the world, if you think the West wasn't just about guns and gold but about the people who stood for something bigger than themselves, then subscribe to this channel, because the next story might just make you believe all over again.